there. So welcome everybody. We are talking about sex today. So the best of CEX, the only conference for people like you, our CRPs. And we're going to be talking about 15 ways to boost chapter engagement. And alongside me is, I feel like my partner in crime inside the association world, Miss Peggy Hoffman. Hey Peggy, how are you?
I'm doing great, and for those of you that see the video I just showed you, I'm wearing my sexy shirt, yes, because we're celebrating a great conference.
Yes, and I actually got my shirt on. So we're bringing it today. So I hope everyone is doing amazing and you're having a great week. Peggy, let's talk a little bit about our agenda and what we're going to be sharing today. So for everyone that is not aware, you can check out leveragechapters.com. We partnered up with Peggy. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Kyle Bazzi. I'm the Director of Growth here at Billhighway, along with Peggy over at Mariner. And we started the first ever chapters only conference. So the component exchange is for people just like you. So a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about today is some stuff that we learned there. You'll see some cool pictures. We hope that you can make it this year. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. But for today, we are going to be talking about, first and foremost, defining chapter strategy and new models. And there's nobody else better to talk about that than Peggy. We're going to be going over improving chapter engagement and networking. 3, leveraging chapter tools and technology, which is a really, really big topic. And last but not least, developing and assessing chapter volunteers. And I know a lot of this also is very intertwined. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So up first, Peggy, let's talk about the old model is not going to take us to the future. What does that mean?
Yeah. So what I really loved about the conference was I was able to connect with 2 people that I really think have done some truly amazing things in terms of getting beyond the old model. One was Lindsay from REPS, and the other one was Jennifer from the North Carolina CPAs. And you see their pictures and from the day there. But what was really neat was that they captured an important point, that chapters, that sort of local feet on the street, still has a critical role. I mean, what Lindsay said was it felt wrong to abandon them. She said because they really need to be there, but there needed to be a better strategy around it. And Jennifer even said, it wasn't the people that weren't connecting. In fact, they had 11 chapters. The problem was only 1% of the people were actually doing anything with it. And they also said that, part of us understanding about the old model, the reason why it's not going to take us into the future has to do with the third point that they made, which was around the trends in volunteering and commitment. The reason why people join and the reason why they then roll up their sleeves and work and help and engage is because it's mission oriented and because it's short term, it's micro, and it fits into their lives. And so the old model, which was a real heavy lift, didn't allow us to really embrace the short term, the easier lift for volunteers. So you have this situation where the old model has got, it's sort of like an old building. It's sort of crumbling around, and so you got to put in some new supports. You got to look for some new ways to address some old structural problems, and that's exactly what they talked about, because both organizations have taken a new approach.
So Peggy, when over the last couple of years that I got to know you, I've learned that you guys talk to a lot of associations on this topic. When I hear feedback coming through, it's a lot around how do we even get started approaching something like this? Because there's so many moving parts. It's such a strategic conversation that you got to get buy-in. Mm-hmm. So as a CRP or others that may be VP of marketing on here or membership, what's your advice to them of how do you even get started? Where do you research? What do you look up? And how does that relate to what REPS did?
Right. So what I really think is interesting is the journeys that both of those 2 organizations, and I've had the opportunity to walk alongside the journey with the North Carolina folks, as well as walking alongside the journey with the 4 other organizations. And we in each case, they've really found a way to follow a pretty similar process. And a couple of the learning points, a couple of the 15 learning points here are actually getting at exactly what you need to do. But the first thing I think is to be in a room full of folks where you're talking about what is working and begin to get that wonderful list of what is working and align that with what we know are some really clear trends around the decision to join, the decision to affiliate. And if you look at those trends and you look at what's working, you're going to see that in most cases there are things that are leveraging those trends. And so then how do you as a group get the group together to begin to say, well, then what do I do to make that work in my own organization? One of the things that I think is really interesting is actually gets to point number 2 in our slide deck here is a part of it is beginning to look at where does the language get in the way. In fact, what I loved about the example of NCACPA, the North Carolina group, when we started talking, we pulled a group of volunteers together, people who had been involved in their chapters, people who had been involved in the statewide, could be the national organization, right? But the larger organization, and people who had not been involved in the chapters. So that we got this whole sense of people that were engaging or weren't engaging. And one of the things we found out along this way was the word chapter carries a lot of history and some of it's negative. And just even the word volunteer has some negative words to it. And so as you begin to say to yourself, okay, are the words part of our problem? And they are. And so I suggest to folks that want to go on this journey that they begin by finding the words that will make a big difference. So it's interesting because in one case, in the RAPS case, the word chapter had a lot of negativity, but it had some important positive aspects of it. And so one of the things they did was they decided to carry forth the positive stuff. Even though it was tied to geography, they said we need to better identify the purpose of it and use additional words around that. And they focused a lot on the new model words around what is a volunteer, around words that got a little bit beyond boundaries and ones that resonated based on interest. And so what you have, and I love the My Member community, is what you have in the case of the North Carolina group is saying that when we recast it as My Member community, I didn't get so tied to, is this a chapter and I don't want to be with a chapter, or is a chapter is a big load. They began to help people think about meetups, which is a really common word now, and networking groups is a really common word. So I think a huge part of creating the change is just as these two women have showed us, is that you need to shift the language along the process in order to keep people interested and engaged.
So that's interesting. So as people, I know a lot of people take notes and takeaways from these things from our webinars. So you're saying that it's not even just like what the new models are out there, but it's the actual labels that we put on these things. So
yes,
that's really
absolutely.
My member community is actually what maybe would be referred to as a part of their chapter before. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
That's awesome.
And we have another slide coming up, which I think is really great, which sort of breaks it out a little bit because she did help us understand. And when we get to that slide, I'll show you the pieces of it. The other part of it, and I love this next slide, which was about the third learning, was to ask volunteer to define the chapter's mission, because we're talking about changing the language. And one of the things we said was, so with RAPS, they said, so create, what is your mission statement, right? And don't create it around the chapter is blah, 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 but what is it that you're doing that's so critical to the profession today and makes such a difference? And it's what's owned at the local level, and it connects back to the national level. And then as you're doing that, again, take out the words that confine you and begin to talk about what the outcome is and how that can be flexible to the futures. When you do this, and these were 2 points that were really critical that I thought Lindsay made. I don't know if she's joined us in this particular call, but she would, I'm sure, echo this, is this whole idea of setting expectations and holding chapters accountable. It happens much more easily when you get them involved at the very beginning, defining it. And so their change practice, and we did in fact show, they used a graphic note taker like we did, and we showed, and we had on display their graphic note taker outcome, because it really showed how the chapter leaders in the room helped create that mission.
Yeah, and so the pictures you're seeing too on the screen, folks, were actually the graphic note taker that we had there. So you'll see that there is, I'm pointing to my computer screen right now, like they can see me pointing. Look up the hashtag on Twitter, and you'll actually see some of the shared learnings. And you can see that the top left picture there. So Peggy, let's level set real quick. So engaging the volunteers, helping, or asking them to define the chapter's mission and the mission statement. Let me play devil's advocate on that, because I'm in my head, I'm sitting here going, well, number one, how do you get the chapters to actually engage, or the volunteers, right? What does that look like? And what if they don't want to? What do you do then?
Well, that's a great question if they don't want to. But see, part of what I think, so change isn't easy, and some people are going to come to it much more readily than others. And I see Lindsay is here, so I just told her to type in some thoughts too as she's listening to the conversation and help us along how she did it. So if they don't want to get involved, you start with the group that wants to get involved. And one of the neat things that both Lindsay did and Jennifer with the CPAs, and we just did this with 2 other groups recently, is you bring the people in the room that care, and you get them really jazzed to talk about what parts they don't like about the process, about their current situation, what parts they do like, and then that kind of energy, if you get that in the room and you have a graphic notator or somebody who's grabbing the energy in this room, people are going to come to a place where they want to be part of that change. And so it really is a change management scenario that we're working through. I think the other thing too is that for some groups, now for RAPS, they kept the name chapters. For NCPA, they changed it. For another group I worked with, they changed it to coordinating bodies and local networking groups. Sometimes the change of the name allows new people into the process. And so when you say, well, some people don't like to change, okay, fine, allow them to sit on the sidelines. But if the new names will bring in the new folks, you can create some energy. And what I loved about it, and the item 4 was really reconsider the language of volunteering. And it was kind of interesting because one of the things that I think that Lindsay said, I'm hitting the wrong button there. One of the things that Lindsay said so well was that when they were looking at what they were asking their volunteers to do, and they were saying, okay, so are we really asking them to be a director? Are we asking them to be this or that? And they said, no, they're asking them to be thought leaders, subject matter experts. And so that actually brought additional people into the process by using the right words.
So let's pause there real quick.
I love it. I mean, I just want to shout real quickly because Lindsay just typed in something. I want to make sure everybody saw the type thing. We found it empowering to the volunteers when we asked to what they wanted. They came out of the woodwork when they felt they were able to have a say in their future. Amen. Alleluia. Thank you, Lindsay, because that's the truth of the matter.
So I think that's like incredibly important real quick. So let's pause on that to make sure that we're hitting on it. And please, folks, send us your questions on this. So, and Lindsay, thank you so much for being here and everything you're giving into this CRP community. You really are incredible. So just changing the words, that sounds, I'm not going to lie, that sounds silly. Like just changing the words made people come out of the woodwork. Why? If for the CRPs that are in here that are struggling with volunteer engagement, or, we hear a lot about how tough succession planning can be, or getting the right people at the chapters. It's all about the people. So why is just changing the words creating such a catalyst of positive change at these chapters? What's going on?
Well, I think part of it is that we bring in the next generation, and this is something that I really did. I saw with Lindsay, but I really, really saw when I sat with the group with Jennifer at NCPA, because we had a couple of their young professionals in the room, and they had the notion of being a thought leader, the notion of being seen in the profession that they were aspiring to, in fact, be a leader. That connected with their goals. And so I think subject matter expert, thought leader, raving fan, all of those things speak to the generation that's coming in the road. Also, there can be numerous thought leaders. There's going to be one president, So it has this sense of inclusion, which I think is also really critical. People have to have to know that there's a space for them. And so I think that makes a difference. I think what we see a lot, and I just came back from a really great session with AOSS. It's the orthopedic surgeons. We were talking about it, and one of the things that we found was when their docs, when their surgeons felt that they were being called to the table to get something done that was going to make an immediate impact, a positive impact, and they knew they could fit it into a period of time that would work for their schedule, they said yes. So part of this changes of language, the idea of changing the language of volunteering is helping people see that it's accessible and it's outcome driven.
So Lindsay also just typed in volunteering. So this is really important, folks, and I'm hitting on this because this is a change you can make as a CRP. Because a lot of things we do talk about is sometimes it's really tough, right? And like changing your model. But what Lindsay just said was, and this is amazing, volunteering, I'm reading off of the webinar chat if you got that in front of you, volunteering as a professional pathway to tying the verbiage to that was key, right? So, but the word volunteering doesn't communicate the value they get out of the role they are performing. So when you are presenting this change, your boss or whoever, write that down and take that, because that's exactly it right there of what we're trying to get at. Awesome. Thank you so much, Peggy. Gosh, I love this.
And you know, and you see what Joe said. I think Joe is really right. I've had a chance to have some good conversations and work with some of his volunteers as well. And thank you, Joe, because you're absolutely right. There isn't really any generation. We keep talking about like it's just a new generation that doesn't want to deal with Robert's Rules of Orders and board elections, but it's really all of us are a little bit tired of it because what we want to do, get in, get something done, and walk away. But the problem is that the structures we have won't allow that. So what reps, what North Carolina CPAs, what AADE, what CRS, what a number of organizations are doing now is saying, let's get rid of the stuff that's getting in the way of that.
Amen. Awesome. All right, let's do it. Number 5.
Yes. So what can we say about number 5? I think that, you know, and again, I'm pulling from Lindsay. We should have had, if we'd known Lindsay was available, Lindsay would have had you on camera. But, you know, she said it was so cool. She said, she stood there and she said to the whole group, she said, you know, here's the thing is that we were telling our leaders it was about revenue, and it really wasn't about revenue. It was about member engagement. And so if you want the chapters to change or to create something different than what they're doing today, you really need to examine the message you're giving, because if you're driving revenue, then their whole idea is how do I get sponsors and how do I sell seats? It's not, have I done anything that's made a difference? So when they change their chapters from being bottom line to mission driven and to be community focused, they began to see some tremendous changes. And quite frankly, I think, and this gets to the last session that we did that day, if you remember, was all about the metrics. And metrics, you're going to measure what you put out there. And if you put out the wrong things, you're going to measure the wrong things. And quite frankly, we shouldn't look at chapters as revenue drivers. We should look at chapters as engagement drivers.
And I want to make a huge point here, because when I learned this from Lindsay, it was incredible. And when we shift the focus, you're going to get better people engaged with your chapters. You're going to concentrate on the value of your organization and using that chapter. The reason you have chapters is to expound that, right? Is to make a greater impact and a larger impact with those chapters. And what happened at RAPS was they stopped looking at the profitability of the chapters and they started measuring the member engagement. And a funny thing happened. For the first time ever, the chapters became profitable. And it was like such like an epiphany moment in my mind. That is, it sounds so simple, but it is incredibly impactful. And anything that's worth it is never easy, right? So let's just get it out of our head. It's not easy, but the impact is profound. And I think that you all need, as CRPs, and we have like a ton of people in here, we need to be change agents at the organization. And I think that we're hitting this one so hard because this is one with the messaging you can control. So I think that is absolutely phenomenal. So this leads us to a great point. Understand how members want to engage and meet them there. So I'm going to ask a question to everybody. How do your members want to meet? So if you want to type in for us as Peggy starts going over this for this topic, how do you know? So let me ask that first. Yes or no? Do you know how your members want to engage and meet? And if you do, what is the old way to the new way? What was the old style of thinking to the new style of thinking? Because I think, Joe, I'd love to hear more from you on this kind of topic too, of no generation wants committees, right, anymore. So how is that changing? And have we defined that at our associations? You're not going to get there today, but you got to define it so we can work towards that. Peggy, let me throw that over to you.
Okay. Yeah, and I want to just mention, because I saw John write in, and you're right, we do have an old guard problem, and we do have to find a way to help the old guard connect. And I think that the easiest way to do this is when you bring a group of people together, you listen for the new guard, if you will. And those are the folks that you pilot stuff with, and those are the folks that you get engaged in the change process. And you have them be enthusiastically talking with the old guard, and the old guard will eventually move in or move away completely. We in associations make a huge mistake when we say we can't do change because somebody doesn't like it. And we stop ourselves in our tracks. Well, we're going to lose members. We can't do that. We can't do a dues increase. We're going to lose members. We can't change the chapters. We're going to lose members. You know what? You're not going to lose members. Yeah, a few aren't going to renew. You're not going to lose members. It's not going to put you under. What it's going to do instead is move you forward. You know, and the proof is in the pudding. I mean, just take a look right here at some of the things that NCICPA's model put up. When they put up the new member community, they said, how do our members want to engage and meet? And they realized that some people wanted to do it completely virtually. Some people wanted to do it very small, one-on-one, short dosage. Some people wanted to be able to roll up their sleeves and do some community action things. So they built into their member community the online connect community, the mentor match, and the volunteer match. And they're allowing people to be able to find the way that they want it. And here I'm not isolated because I'm in a chapter and I don't connect myself with a larger organization. Instead, we all come into this same community to find what we want. And then we feel like we're part of this larger community because we came into the same door. So they're using meetups and local networking groups basically as a way to let people say, this is what's going to meet what I need right now. So it's really exciting if you ask that question that you've asked.
So another point that so something recently in the news I just read. So Meetup.com just got bought, and Meetup.com was a very mission-driven organization. They got bought by a very large company. And when I read the article, it said in an era of everything going online and becoming disconnected, Meetup.com's mission was to do the opposite. Was to get together in person when everyone's talking about just online communities. And I think a big point here is when you learn how they want to meet, it's not just one way. It is what is your toolbox of engagement? And I think that's a huge point is meeting in person it's funny. I listen to some stuff at conferences around like online communities, and they're incredibly important, no doubt. But meeting in person, it's like, imagine like, marrying somebody you've never met. And I know that happens around the world, but
be careful.
But like you can never like imagine creating a real relationship with somebody if you don't have that physical sense. And so it's a tool in your toolbox. And I think if you kind of put the perspective on it like that, I love what's listed out here. You can connect online, so there is that access. But if obviously CPAs found out like mentors are a big deal, and as they are at a lot of associations. So let's create a path just for that, rather than having that only at the physical event. So the hodgepodge comes from first and foremost learning, though. So Peggy, what's a good way to go about discovering this information from your members?
So one of the things that we did, and I'll point to the North Carolina because I walked through the process with them. But the first thing we do is I said, give me all your data about how members are currently engaging. Let's let's dive in. And she did, Jennifer, it's really great. They created a heat map of where people were connecting and what were they connecting on. We looked for pockets of energy and activity. And then we looked at how people were coming in, what they were asking for, what events that they went or didn't go to. Really took a look at all of the data, because the data will tell you things that members will not. When you say to people, will you go to a chapter meeting? Anybody who thinks they ever will say yes. So then you think that there's this great demand for chapter meetings. But in fact, all they've told you is they would. They didn't do it yet, right? So the best thing to do is to go ahead and take a look at the data. The second thing is if you have limited data, and some of us do, right? But not all of us have access to data. Well, I'm going to tell you, build the system so you do have access to data. But in the meantime, you can ask people, but I don't ask people, would you go? I ask people, how many did you attend? And I ask people to tell me about their behavior, not to tell me what they think they would do. Not that you don't want to know how important some stuff is, but let's collect what people are doing. Let's find out how they're doing it. Now, the other important thing is, and I've done this a couple of times when we've done some surveys out there, I don't ask them, I don't really say, do you go to chapter meetings? I ask them, where do you get education? And I ask them, how do you network? I don't ask them, do you go to a conference? Because here's the problem. Because remember this slide we saw about changing the language? If you say to people, how important are chapter meetings? If they don't like chapter meetings, it's going to be a no. But that doesn't tell you that they don't want to get together in a meetup. That doesn't tell you that it's not important to them to be able to meet their folks, right? So if you say, do you want to get your education online, at the national conference, at a chapter meeting? Well, I hate going to chapter meetings, but I'd love to get that education locally. See what I'm saying? So part of it is a little bit of is surveying, a little bit of is what data that you have, and then, good old-fashioned try things. So it's been, let me think, 2002, a group of us in the Columbia, Maryland metro area between Baltimore and D.C., our association pros didn't want to travel into D.C., and we just on a fluke started meeting. And our group has ebbed and flowed, but we've had a meetup now since 2002. Sometimes there's 5 of us, one time, more than once, about a half a dozen or more times there's been 40 of us, and mostly there's usually about 10 to 15 of us. We just tried it, and we just keep trying stuff. And I think that the other way you find out how members want to engage and meet is you try stuff.
Yeah, and so we'll sit down afterwards. I have something that I use. It's called Customer, but it's the same thing for member of interview template. And it's exactly that, Peggy, getting away from the yeses and nos and opening it up for learning what you don't know, because you don't know what questions to ask. And number 7 here is satisfy the need for networking outside the chapter structure.
Yes.
And here's a really great tidbit that I learned when we were talking to, we did a webinar on this, the AIGP for graphic professionals, artists, designers. The chapter or the association found out that all of their members and many more people that could be members were connecting on a tool called Slack. And there were all of these Slack channels that they were already doing. So what the association did through the chapters is created a Slack channel for each chapter. And each chapter now was facilitating what was already going on. And here's what happened. Now they have a multiple of double digits, like 10, 13x more people in their Slack channels than are currently members. So they've created this platform for members and non-members to connect that they now have access to. And what an asset. Could you imagine that? But it's facilitating it outside of the normal chapter structure because they asked the right questions. So your questions are so much more important than the answers you're actually getting. So that's definitely one way to figure this out.
Right. And I think that the 2 ways that you're putting up right now are really important ways of us looking at chapters differently. Maybe an area can't support a full-fledged chapter, but they could have a local networking group or a meetup like I have in the Columbia area. And the nice thing is that when we talk about technology, it allows us to do all of that, right? Mm-hmm. Technology is a great equalizer. But we do get back to nomenclature. People say, I don't want to be a local network group. I want to be a chapter of. So again, find the language that works, but allow the structure that also works. I think that's really critical.
In real quick, Peggy, because Lindsay and Antonio actually said a couple of great things in the chat. So I would write this down, folks, if you're not doing this today. Tying KPIs to mission versus budget was critical in that process, Lindsay said. Antonio said something very, very similar, and focusing on KPIs connected to our mission and our vision. And that's got to be at the chapter level.
Right.
So that was one tidbit that I wanted to tie back to an earlier slide. So definitely write that down if that's one of your key challenges right now.
Right. And let me just, part of that also is getting to this bigger concept of the chapters are not a silo, right? We tend to think of here's the organization and there are the chapters. And when I use the word chapters, let's be honest, sometimes they're independent organizations, sometimes they're seamless organizations, and sometimes they're a hybrid. So, but I'm just saying that for us to take, regardless of your formal structure, for us to say that chapters are over here and national is over here is part of the problem. And 7 is saying, find the intersection of those two, find where members want to connect. And when you do that, you begin to build an ecosystem. And that ecosystem, just as you can see on the slide, as you look at the slide there, that ecosystem starts with the member and then says some meet in big groups, some meet in smaller groups, some meet virtually. How do we build all different kinds of ways of doing that? And then really empower the members to be leaders in each of these groups.
Whew, all right. We're halfway through, almost halfway through, and we know this is a lot of information. In these webinars, don't get overwhelmed. Find the one takeaway that you can make a change right now. We challenged everybody at CEX to go and find one thing, because you're all in different places, right? You all have different challenges. Many are the same, and we want to collaborate on that with you guys. But keep finding that one thing. So we're going to find that focus. So now we've talked a lot about that engagement, but Peggy, you touched on this earlier, and this is always a challenge, is how do you leverage technology? Because we all just probably got done, or a lot of us got done doing our budgets, right, for 2018 and getting all that approved and what we're doing and tying into our strategic objectives. But how have you seen, what have you seen, but how have you seen associations just crush it when they leverage technology for their chapters? Yeah,
so you have to ask this question. You have to look at it from a couple different vantage points, okay? So on one hand, there's how do we really empower, support, and allow our feet on the street, those volunteers, to be optimized in the role that they're playing. So that's part of it. Part of it, though, also is how, as we as an organization, leverage all of the activity and the data so that we as an organization can be more effective in meeting the overall members' needs. So there's technology that really support our volunteers, and there's technology that really optimize our ability to support our mission and our member. And I think we have to talk about those separately and yet together. So 4 examples right here that we put up there that we touched on at this particular meeting, and I'd love to see, maybe, I'm going to lay this on you guys, maybe let's just do a series of webinars on each one of these, because I think we could really get some really cool people talking about these. But there's the online volunteer portal. This is a really cool, robust, believe me, it can be small, medium, or large, but it's a place, it's 24/7 available, one-stop shop for volunteers to be able to find the resources they need. But it's also a really good volunteer portal. It's a place for me to raise my hand and say, I'd like to learn more about volunteering. A place for you to collect those wonderful volunteer profiles that allow you then to connect the person to what they can do. See, we talk about this a lot with NIGP. I'm part of their talent council, and we talk about it's not about starting with the position, it's about starting with the person and making that connection. An online portal has 2 parts to it. It's the resource part, and it's also the part that allows us to help people match and find what will make a difference in their engagement. The other element is that, and it says consistent brand and message, we're talking about is how are we leveraging technology for communications so that we're not in these silos, but we're in a central organization. It takes a lift off of our volunteers, but it also allows our members to have a richer stream of information. So what are the communication platforms that you can use? And there are a host of them now that allow the organization nationally to support the members in putting out really good communications. Automating administrative tasks is everything. Now let's think about the finance. I mean, I know, Billhighway, you guys do some amazing things on that side. I know you don't want to use this time to talk about it, but I just want to put the plug out there is that some of the things that are getting in the way of our volunteer leaders are things that the national organization can help handle around the dollars, for example, and then around the shared database. If you can set up, whether it's tapping a Billhighway or it's tapping an AMS that has the chapter portals available to them, whatever it is, it's sharing that data, and it's allowing us to have all the data in one place where we can maximize what information it's telling us. When you do these things, each and every one of these things makes the job of being a volunteer easier. But I also want to stress, and here is, when as CRPs, we have a hard time sometimes being able to sell our ideas to management, to the C-suite, right? At the end of the day, this is about optimizing the opportunity for the organization to be able to move the mission and meet the members' needs. The more that we do in the way of that wonderful data and how do we use it, and that consistent brand message, and that ability to make sure we're customizing and personalizing the experience, and then allowing our volunteers to be the carrier, wow, it's like win-win-win.
So I was like sprinkling in some little tidbit ideas to connect some of this. So let me ask you a question. It might be a good question to ask your organization. How many of your chapters even have a page, so dedicated about volunteering and what that means? And let's look at those labels. But then how many of you have like an email capture form on there saying, hey, by the way, are you interested in volunteering or giving time to the mission? And just capturing what people are inputting. And then where would you want to give? How many just have that sitting there 24/7? Or are you making very select times where you're allowing people to tell you that information, right? I think that's one of the things that I've learned going through so many chapters websites is across different associations and industries is we don't make it easy on ourselves. So that's one little way, one little tidbit. If we could just add a form on our chapter's website saying, hey, would you like to give time? And here's the different ways that we might, you could volunteer, but let us know if you have others. And then it's a constant flow of all of these. And then I love at the bottom here. So if you need proof, let's band together. If you need proof and you're trying to get a project pushed through to your management, talk to Peggy and myself and my entire marketing team. I got Sarah back here who, if you love our webinars and you love the event, she has a lot of people should be thanking this woman behind me. But we have teams that we can connect you with other CRPs, component relations professionals, to get you some kind of case study for whatever project you are working on. You are not the first one to do it, and you're not the first, and people have screwed that one up and they've done it amazing. So let's get you those resources in that proof. Okay, so number 9, sometimes the machines know better, Peggy. What does that mean?
Well, so this really comes from a learning that we picked up from what Lindsay was saying. But, what happens oftentimes particularly, it's almost incestual at the chapter level when we're talking about volunteers. So we only go one step, who do I know? And I ask that person and they say, I don't have time and I'm out of people, right? Or we know this person, that we're comfortable with them, so we bring them in, but they turn out to be a horrible leader, but I won't tell them because they're my friend. And so what you've done is you've created a system where, can you see Terminator? Yes. You've created a system where you're relying on a flawed recruitment and selection process. When you allow for a volunteer portal, when you allow for an opportunity for people to opt in and tell you things, and there to be a matching system between what I want to do and who I am and what you need to be done, all of a sudden you get greater diversity in the pool. You reach out to people that people didn't know about. So not only diversity in the sense of it could be, race, ethnicity, sex, blah, 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 right? But also diversity in the sense of people that you hadn't heard from before, right? So fresh faces, right? And you also meet new people, and usually new people infuse new ideas and new concepts. So when we say sometimes machine spun butter, what we're really saying is stop operating on the incestual way that we're doing volunteer development, which was, who do you know? And start allowing technology to gather, make some matches. Now, imagine the difference here. So here I am, a chapter president, and I want desperately to find a committee chair, right? And I'm going to wait, and I'm going to have to look around at the people I know, but everybody's saying no, and so that means that it goes empty. Or what if there was a portal and I say, please give me everybody who's interested in, let's say it's a communications chair position, everybody who says they're interested in writing and would like to do something at the local level. All of a sudden, 5 names pop up. These are 5 people I didn't know. Now, the ask is so much easier. Hey, you said you were interested in this. You said it here. I'm calling you up. All of a sudden, the ask is easier. It's to a new person. Yes, and RAPS is a Regulatory Affairs Professional Society. Lindsay Curry is actually on the chat as well. So, Antonio, meet Lindsay. Lindsay, meet Antonio. Just doing a little meet up there on the chat for you guys, folks.
I love it. And I want to applaud you, Antonio, because you just said something that I think is the start, is saying we don't do a good enough job at that, but we're working on it. And that is okay. We got to be able to admit that and create a safe environment where we need to say, you know what, we don't do that really well right now. I can't work on it right now is okay to say too, but defining that I think is really important. Okay, number 10, so offering a continuum of volunteer experiences. Peggy, I learned this from you. I was like on fire about it. What do you mean by a continuum of volunteer experiences?
Yeah, so we will have to, if anybody wasn't at Sexy and they really want, we've got a couple of great examples where we can actually like show this to you and send you a handout or whatever. But basically, we're talking about honoring all the small, medium, and large ways that people can get involved. And at the first end, we talk about the consumers, the ones that are taking content, reading it, and then they start to share it. So it's recognizing that is an important part of engagement. It not only is an important part of engagement because it's sharing the experience of the organization, but because that is the door through which people who give you more time will oftentimes enter. So the continuum of engagement honors the folks that are at that very simple level of consuming, using, and sharing back, right? All the way to the other side where they're doing and governing. And we talk about a continuum because the continuum suggests that all of those are equal. And the biggest flaw we make is honoring the presidents or maybe the committee chairs, but not acting like these smaller jobs are just as important. So we minimize them and we don't recognize them and we don't train and support them. We need those folks desperately in order for us to be able to build our volunteer pool. So the continuum says there's this wonderful stages. I love RAP's continuum because they put different words to it, which I thought are really great. And maybe I can push Lindsay to go ahead and type out their different stages. But they talk about stages, and it's a really cool, and they let them know that engagement is valuable at each of those ends. Now, here's the other important thing, that the green dot there is when you do a continuum, it says to people you can pop in and out. So if I don't have time, I can come back in and do it. I'm not on some track that if I leave, I'm going to lose, right? And that's really important.
Yeah, and it's so important for volunteer burnout too. Is if they feel like they can't do it, then they will disengage from the association. But if you set the expectation that it's a good thing to come in and out, and when they have time, you'll get more engagement. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about supporting chapters with online toolkits, because I think everyone's got some version of this. Some of it might just be a Word doc that's actually not online, but others might be going down this route. But how can CRPs help create these online toolkits for their chapters?
So I'm wondering if, I don't know if Patrick from GBTA is on. I love his because his is kind of like super simple. It's really, they're using their website and they put up all kinds of resources and ideas and really some really neat things, which are just easy to download, right? So an online toolkit, and RAPS has got one. I've seen it to the point where folks have a file library. So if you have an online community, you have a file library and you have file subfolders in there and you say, this is about meetings, this is about communications, this is about recruitment, this is about planning. And you make it real easy so it's an online file folder people can get to it. We just work with an organization where we built this in Dropbox. So now I've seen some more sophisticated ones, which was actually not that more difficult. But with just worked with SFPE, the fire protection engineers, and they use your membership, and on their community, they built this a community for it, and it's driven by questions I want to do, and you click and it takes you to a file folder. So there's this question driven, and what we did was we listened to what the volunteers were asking for. It really makes a tremendous difference in being able to find things very easy. It's got to be online, guys. Get rid of the binders. Get rid of all the stuff you're sending folks, because really you can't change it, you can't update it. Stuff gets out there and it gets old, so make it an online tool. RAPS has gotten, I know Lindsay will share with us. I can speak, I think, for SFPE that we'd be happy to share for you. I know Patrick has shared his stuff with me. I've taken stuff off of his for our use. So those are all great people to go ahead and take a look at. Meanwhile, I just want to mention real quickly, Lindsay just put in a link for you all so you can take a look at their Continuum. So if you want to, connect right through that to see engaged member, RAPS champion, subject matter expert, thought leader, strategic.
And that leads us into our volunteer Continuum slide as well. So do you want to talk to this, Peggy?
Yeah, let me just talk real quickly, because this is part of what this particular thing links to, and this next couple of slides all link to the same thing, which is this idea of how do you support your volunteers. And part of it is understanding that we've got several layers. We've got emerging volunteers all the way up to strategic volunteers. Sometimes our chapter leaders portals are full of stuff for the president and the president chair, president-elect, or the communications chair, the events chair. We're not necessarily saying, okay, what does an emerging volunteer need? So are there toolkits? So PRSA, for example, gives us to share with our volunteers. They'll give us all kinds of sample tweets and links and those kinds of things. So even our little committee members or folks that are doing some work for us have access to easy tools so that they can get the job done, if you will. So it's really about us understanding that we've got these different levels of volunteers, and how are we going to bring them into the process? And part of that is doing training and orientation that meets all of these needs. I love the fact that item number 12 is about hosting an annual conference, because part of what we're talking about doing is creating this opportunity to support these volunteers in face-to-face and online and virtual. Everybody in the room, when we talked at the meeting, they all said, yes, we do some sort of a summit or an annual meeting. I think it's critical. I know it costs. Believe me, I know it costs. And frankly, I do some training for a lot of them, and I love to do this stuff. But I will tell you that the energy you get in that room, the ability for them to connect and talk and to see that other people have the same successes and failures. And you want to know something? If you want to go back to that first slide to say, how do I create that change to get off the old model? If you've got these people talking in the room and they know each other and they feel the same pains and they see the same successes, they're going to get in the room and talk about how do we create change. That annual conference is important. I don't want to say like it's the only thing, right? And in number 13, what we talk about is the fact that you want to have the community. You want to keep this going, right? We've put up an example here of RAPS's online community, because she was so awesome in giving us all this information. But the community is the glue for the rest of the year. Bring them together and then get them talking and sharing and changing. Now, some online communities are crickets. But the groups that have really gotten a couple of moderators, a couple of raving fans to start talking, and if you find that the community is offering good, solid suggestions and recommendations, you can make it work a lot more effectively. But we have seen that this notion of minimally is having the face-to-face and an online community are a way of allowing this group of volunteers to really bond.
Yeah, Peggy, just to hit on the online community too, if you don't have a online community manager, that is often a pillar of success and failure. So if you can't pay for one, see if you can get volunteers, and you can find good volunteers to do it at the chapters or for you up there at HQ. But make sure you concentrate on how you execute online community, because the tool itself is not going to do it. And real quick, before you talk about the training here, Peggy, Lindsay, be careful what you ask for. She said you can reach out to her, and she put an email in the chat. So it's lcurrie, Currie @raps.org. So we love highlighting a lot of really great examples out there for you during these webinars. And obviously a lot of this we're taking from Raps here too. So reach out to Lindsay. We love to see you all connect so you guys can help each other. But Peggy, or go ahead.
I'd say you'll be totally inspired talking with that woman.
As are we. So Peggy, let's. This was amazing. So when we set up the Sexy conference, I remember thinking like, okay, we got these 3 rooms. We're going to put a presenter up at front, and we're going to have stadium seating, and we're going to our classroom seating, and they're going to learn. And you're like, Kyle, there's no way in hell we're doing it that way. And what you transformed was just so cool that day in what you created. So talk to me about, and you taught me this, assuring training isn't one time, one size.
Right. So, there's a whole bunch of stuff packed in that statement, and I think the reason why I love to really emphasize this is that we, as adult learners, even this hour is long for some of us, right? And so we really need the opportunity to have conversation, to have connections. And so part of what I say is that if you can think of your volunteer training and development, particularly for your very important feet on the street volunteers, if you can think about it, plan it out in 12 months. Don't plan it out in, we're going to do this conference next year, but plan it out in the 12 months. You're going to be able to make sure that you provide training that meets the very different kinds of learners. Yeah. If we talked about it, and then I gave 3 examples, and so in the next set of slides, we talked about the 24/7 online community, which we just talked about, but there's also on demand. So this we're recording this, right? So this will be on demand for CRPs that didn't get a chance to see it. There's some really neat stuff that AAD is doing that they've shared before, and I'm sure that we can get them to share again. These are quick little videos, right, that are just, they just say, you need to know how to do this, and here it is. Can I just make a side note? My partner Peter and I are actually working with a couple of organizations right now, and we are brainstorming on this idea of how do we bring together a group of organizations to develop maybe a series of these one-up little videos that we all could use as a community. So keep that in the back of your mind and shoot me an email, or shoot it to Lindsay, and Lindsay will forward it to me on that. But then there's also the recurring, and then there's the in-person. So this is what I'm suggesting it might look like, is that you plan out your whole year, and you have a quarterly webinar, and you have a monthly live chat, and I love it. We just did that with RAPS, actually, a really cool live chat with their leaders on their community. Then you have a quick little meetup. Maybe you have a meeting. Maybe you have a conference. Don't put a whole educational thing. Talk about a meetup. Let's get together. Then you have an in-person workshop. Maybe you have then you have, of course, the your conference. But say to yourself, how many different ways can I connect?
And so getting here to the top of the hour, we got a couple more takeaways, folks. So number 14 is about providing constructive feedback to chapters and leaders. And the picture you're seeing at the conference was all along the walls, we had the different topics throughout the day that we had runners that we would say, write down your feedback, write down your ideas, write down your epiphanies, and we were putting them on the wall. So we learned with each other, but it also was great constructive feedback kind of exercise as well. So Peggy, talk to us about why is this important, and what is like the minimal we should make sure we're hitting on our journey of doing a much better job at this.
Right. So it's really critical with your chapters, and we said this a little bit earlier, but let me just underscore it, is that you define what success looks like, and you make sure that the success actually matches what you need to have happen. right? So the checklist approach needs to go out the door. So right now, go to those checklists that you're using where you ask people to do all these things and then they get so many points for each one, and ask in each case, does this item move the mission, meet the members' needs? Okay? And if it doesn't, take it off. Now, maybe some of them you're still going to keep on, but for the most part, you're going to take many of them off. And then you're going to say, okay, so what are really true examples? When I say that my chapter is successful, what am I really looking for? Well, 9 out of 10 times, you're looking for how have they engaged their members? And if they have 100 members, how have they reached and connected those 100 members? So let's take a look at that. So it's really critical that you define what success looks like. And then it's really critical that you give your volunteers the feedback to say that they've met it or they didn't meet it. And let's not sugarcoat it anymore. If they don't meet it, let's get with them, roll up our sleeves, and figure out how we can make it happen. One of the things that we recommend along the line someplace is to do some sort of an individual volunteer assessment. That's probably a heavy lift for most organizations, but if you got the other two, go ahead and do that. So remember that all of this is constructive feedback. So what we're saying is don't penalize. When we say, oh, if you can't do this, we're going to take away your charter. And most of them go, yeah, like, first of all, you haven't taken anybody's charter away, so I don't feel threatened. But secondly, taking the charter away, that's not going to make a difference, right? Instead, it needs to be how do we help them succeed? And maybe they are succeeding, but they're just not succeeding because they don't look if they're succeeding on paper because of what we're measuring.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So number 15 is like my hallelujah moment. So it's about walking in the shoes of your volunteers. I think, and this is my opinion, I think the reason I love sharing and educating, and I love helping associations with chapters, it has nothing to do about my actual work at Billhighway. I'm a chapter leader for the Detroit chapter of Startup Week. So we have this huge event, 7,000 people. I have 300 volunteers, and I lead this thing every year. And I've learned more about the work I'm doing here at Billhighway by doing that, right? By living that and understanding, because when we talk about volunteer burnout, I can think of people in my head here in Detroit that got burnt out the first year I threw the event. Because the second year, they didn't even answer my email, right? And so walking in the shoes of your volunteers, and I want to ask you all this, and you can type this in if you want. What is your method to do that? Do you have dedicated time? Maybe it's annually, maybe it's a day, a quarter, or something like that, to actually walking in the shoes of your volunteers. I think that's the question you need to ask yourself is, how am I doing that? And we would love to learn from you that are doing it in a way that is working, phenomenally, or even the ones that say, don't do this. But you can see the quote here again from Raps is, I encourage my own staff to volunteer in their professional associations. And actually here at Billhighway, we do the same thing. So Sarah behind me is a part of the marketing association here in Detroit. Our designer is a part of the designer association. I joined the sales association here, right? So I think that, some people call it eating your own dog food, right? I don't really love that one because who wants to eat dog food? But living that out will keep you close to what matters. So as things shift, you'll already be a part of it, not trying to learn about it when it's already happened.
Amen.
All right, so we are getting to the top of the hour here. This always flies by with you, Peggy, and I have so much fun. So let's talk about some key takeaways that we learned at the conference at CEX. So I'll start us off here first too. The first is strategy. And I know this stuff can get overwhelming because there's, oh my gosh, I want to do this. I want to do this. We're not doing that well enough. Your job is to prioritize it. Now, it's a funny thing about the word priority. Does anyone know the Latin meaning for priority? It's one. So priorities isn't a word. It is a word, but it means one, right? So what is your priority? Because look at Antonio, you got it, my man, yes. So if you think about it that way, get all that stuff on it and just parking lot it and figure out what's our priority, what's our one. So the first is obviously the strategy. And then Peggy, you want to talk about engagement?
Yes, let's make it happen. Let's put the metrics in place that are all about engagement. Let's say to our folks that we're going to give them opportunities that meet how they want to engage. Let's change the way that we organize our chapters so that more people want to get engaged. And let's be honest, I mean, I'm working with another organization where still it's under a third. And some organizations, it's under a quarter of people that are actually engaged in chapters. We're spending a lot of time for those people. I do believe other people could be engaged, but we got to do it the way they want to, not the way we want to.
And so the last two big takeaways too is, how are you leveraging technology, number 3. And number 4 is, I would say, creating this feedback loop, right? That's a continuous process on the feedback. So Peggy, what are the 2018 key takeaways?
I don't know. I think maybe they ought to tell us what they'd like to have takeaways from the 2018 conference, because if you tell us what you want, we will bring it to you. Billhighway Mariner, this is not about us making money. It's not about us anything. It's about us crafting next year's conference in a way that meets your needs. We have the experience squad. They told us what some of the takeaways were for this year, so we created it. We need you. Tell us what you want.
All right, folks. So we're a minute over, so I'll share one more thing. If you are in the Chicago area, we do have one of our roundtables. This is kind of like a continuation of CEX throughout the entire year. We do them monthly in a bunch of different cities. So Chicago is coming up on December 6th. And if you are in the area, we're going to be at ASC Tech. But even if you're not going to the conference, that's fine. On the 13th of December, we're having a CRP happy hour. So be on the lookout for details coming in your email on that. Ms. Hoffman.
So yeah, there is a question about what is the date, because we know you want to get it on your calendars. And here's the deal: we are in negotiations with the hotel right now. It's going to be in October, and it's going to be in the DC metro area again. As soon as we are able to nail down the location, we will be out to you and spread the word. So yeah, it's just clear your calendars for October 2018.
All right, folks, we are a couple minutes over. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Peggy, as always, love doing this stuff with you. You are phenomenal and an incredible human being, and especially for this community. But really, all of you in here for the feedback, the people that give, Lindsay and the CPAs, it's just so phenomenal to be doing this all for you. As always, we love it. We will be sending out a recording and more information. If you need anything, just email marketing@Billhighway and we will go to work for you. Otherwise, have a phenomenal week. Peggy, thank you so much for your time again.
Thank you, and a round of applause for Billhighway, because we love you as a partner, and you are great, and your people behind you are even super duper and awesome, and all those good things. Listen, guys, we'll also get a couple of things out to you that I saw come up in the chat. October 2018, but before then, December 6th, Chicago. December 13th, DC.
All right. Bye, everybody. Bye, Peggy.